All right, thank you. All right, so thanks for that. So what we're going to discuss today is actually something called data resilience. I think we've been hearing a lot of data protection. It is just a modern way of saying and how we moved on from traditional backup and recovery and added a lot of value add things, and not just value add, those are perhaps the necessary things. And I'll just take a moment before we actually proceed with any technology stuff. It's more of a fun fact what actually data resilience stand for, and trying to correlate with probably the dictionary definitions right here, right? So we all know data, yeah, it's the facts and statistics collected together for reference or analysis, and resilience is in turn the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, right? And what that actually translates to is, let me just get my laser pointer. So I think this capability was well known, right? It is much like the insurance policies we've been dealing with in backup and recovery world or data protection world in general. I think before any car goes on the road, it must have an insurance. Likewise, any mission critical server goes live in production with mission critical apps hosted from your organizations. It has to have a backup, which means if touch wood things fail, if things go wrong, I must have an insurance policy to fail back to be able to recover the data quickly, right? And I think that definition has extended a lot. What that means is there are elements of cyber resilience. There is a flexibility enough to provide proper accessibility, right? And there are a lot of inherent elements which are also shaped up in the last 5 years with things like copy data management, data reuse beyond just governance, backup, recovery, and recovery objectives, right? So these two elements are also kind of born by the modernization of applications, where customers are aggressively moving into containerized applications, or rather modernization of the application development infrastructure itself. And the reasons are even a lot more in the last couple of years, since we're in a new normal, and I'll share why. So let's take a step back and see how data protection looked like in a traditional application environment, right? Before even jumping into what backup IBM has to offer, right? It was, I think, this sort of architecture was very established for the longest time, perhaps since I started my career, and it's still probably the most prevalent architecture of running a service. For example, in a restaurant, if I'm running a simple counter, I probably need to have some sort of information technology deployed with a point of sale database, employee data, payroll data, and so forth, depending on how large my restaurant is, and typically stored in a database running perhaps some of the web server, application server to be able to access, right? So things were very, very easy, and perhaps they are still easy for a lot of organizations. But what that means is I would back up either to a disk, and then depending on my compliance and governance policy, it could be as complex as sending them offsite to a traditional recovery site, my own recovery site or someone else's recovery site like Iron Mountain. It could also be public cloud, perhaps a hosted cloud, a mixture of both somewhere. Well, what it boils down to is I have a fear of losing data. There is a fear of accidental deletion, and all the more now there is a fear of perhaps cyber attack, ransomware. So I need these protected copies to be kept somewhere. So if touch wood something happened, I could recover back. Well, fast forward, I think this has been perhaps accelerated for more than 5 years, I believe. And it has probably accelerated exponentially in the last couple of years with food deliveries, right? And I think the restaurants have changed, and there is a paradigm shift in how they need their application. And it may not be their own application. They could be actually depending on as simple as GrabFood or Foodpanda, right? And their interaction with technology has changed in a massive way, right? It's no longer just about point of sale database or a restaurant, or perhaps the employee database and so forth. It is actually a bunch of things which enable restaurants to do deliveries, right? And not just delivery, They probably need some sort of interaction in a containerized world. So they could have multiple containers sitting inside either their own app or a third-party app, which are continuously tracking the location of the food, the delivery of the food, and not just that, even post-delivery, there is a lot of other things which restaurants would love to know. Things like on a busy day, let's say on a Friday, what is my top food or what is the most top on-demand food, right? So that I could make actual critical business decisions of stocking up the inventories, right? To make sure I can, on Fridays, I have those fantastic chicken wings available all throughout, right? And it doesn't stop there. I perhaps need a lot more than that. I need big data analytics to make sure how market is doing, how the other competitors are doing. So the interaction with technology has changed big time, right? So the whole simple architecture of running a simple SQL service with a front-end web server has what we call changed into a microservices architecture deployed in multiple points, right? And these microservices perhaps maybe together form a service mesh and stored in perhaps even a NoSQL database. Things have changed, but fast forward, I think the ability or the desire or to have that capability to have the insurance policy hasn't changed much, right? What that means is although my data protection might be sufficient, but it may not be resilient enough to give me the recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives to protect this infrastructure, right? And that's where I would say IBM's data resilience approach has been geared towards, right? And I think you'll see more and more with that acquisition. This has actually accelerated. Perhaps in the last 18 months, what I've seen with IBM data protection is many folds growth in terms of the technology as well as the footprint, right? So our 4Cs, right? They're quite simple. First one is convergence and simplicity, which means unify our traditional approach of protecting monolithic applications, mission critical applications running from mainframes all the way to Openshift system shift or perhaps generally the open systems, right? And provide the right data resilience for those applications, right? And wherever they are, regardless of what kind of architecture, whether they're running on premises or if they're running, let's say, on cloud or in a hybrid multi-cloud environment, of course, and the next generation, the containers platform, right? So that's where our 4Cs are revolving around in data resilience approach. Right? So without any further ado, I'll introduce the product itself, which was in fact built from ground up way back in 2017, right? So this has some sort of roots and intellectual properties, which we borrowed from our Tivoli family of data protection, which has been in the Gartner Leaders Quadrant for data protection for over a decade, right? So a very mature technology, which we sort of just took the intellectual property of key things we have been doing for the last 15 years or so, and build a new product ground up built on microservices architecture. So this product itself is built for the modern world. It itself has, and I'll share those characteristics later. But in a nutshell, what it does is it does a simple backup, agentless backups for virtual environments, containers, Kubernetes, Openshift, as well as critical applications running on physical servers, including our own Power Platform, right? And also some of the software as a service elements running on the cloud, for example, all your critical Microsoft Office 365 or your workloads running in the cloud, AWS or Azure. Right? So, and of course, it addresses on a simple scale, it addresses two use cases. One is the data protection, which means it does backup and recovery. It provides the ability to recover in case of disaster. And it provides continuous access to your data, very key milestone here, because that really steps into the copy data management and data reuse use cases, right? So we in fact recently acquired technology which is very specialized in copy data management. So this product is built from a copy data management product and spinned off into a backup dimension or backup and recovery dimension. Versus you will perhaps see a lot of traditional established backup vendors trying to do copy data management. So just to put across the message that this product was, or in fact was a copy data management product, which started doing backup versus, anything else you probably see in backup and recovery space, which was a backup software and started trying to do copy data management. Right? So what that means is for developers, for DevOps, for reporting, for analytics purposes, for data, for all sort of data reuse purposes, this software delivers continuous access to data by storing data in simple native format and providing instant recovery options for virtual machines, as well as physical applications and software as a service running on your open systems. All right, so let's take a look at some of the key characteristics of the IBM modern data protection. Right. So it is low cost to acquire and easy to deploy. In fact, our list price, if you just do a Google search on Spectrum Protect Plus, right on the homepage itself, you'll get an option to download the trialware, as well as you will see the list price published for your respective markets, right? So don't start Googling now, perhaps wait for the end of the presentation, and then just do a simple Google search and see the published price right away. So we've been aggressive in this space to make sure everybody can get access to the data quick and in a low cost, so immediate ROI in that sense, right? It has an intuitive user interface, which means it's built on a Web 2.0 intuitive interface, which there is a live demo as well for everyone to access. I'll share that information later on. It's also available to be accessed through the RESTful API. So very modern way of protecting your data in two ways, right? There is a proactive backup catalog, and a very interesting aspect, although we say proactive backup catalog. So what all that means is actually, in fact, the catalog itself runs on a MongoDB embedded inside our virtual appliances, which gives you a Google-like search access for all the data we index, right? So very efficient, scalable, NoSQL database at the back end, a very rich set of catalog for you to mine the data, to provision data wherever and whenever needed. There is instant recovery option. So what that means is you're able to get lowest RTO. So recovery time objectives is literally hovering around in 2 minutes versus hours, because your data can be instantly recovered from our backup repositories. Or I would say, in fact, we have moved away from the term backup repository. We literally call these repositories copy repositories. And the architecture slide, you'll see what copy repositories can do or are capable of doing. It is software defined. So I think in the last decade or so, there has been a lot of buzz around purpose-built backup appliances, or perhaps the integrated backup appliances. But where I think building a product from scratch back away in 2017, we just realized software defined is the way to go to enable the hybrid multi-cloud infrastructure, or moving forward, the containerized infrastructure. It must be software defined, right? So all the elements, in fact, it's kind of best of both worlds in terms of delivery. And so virtual appliances, literally, when they came in, backup applications were monolithic. So there was a lot of tedious effort which needed to be spent on just installing and configuring a backup software. So what that means is you perhaps require an operating system, a database, a third-party database licensed and installed, then probably install some of the supporting libraries, things like .NET or like Java, right? And then on top, you install the backup software. So that became a lot more complex, which is why the origin of purpose-built or integrated backup appliances was, and of course, the storage management aspect of it. While being software defined, so we have hidden that complexity. In fact, our software delivery, right from way back when we launched the first version of this product in 2017, late 2017, we started shipping as virtual appliances, right? And then just last year, we have sort of containerized this as well. So you have two options: either run as a virtual appliance or as an Openshift, Red Hat Openshift, or a Kubernetes container, right? So everything is pre-installed otherwise. So there's no complexity of managing OS, supporting libraries, and so forth, right? And then the storage, we support any block storage. So you'll see on the architecture more and more of this. There is the self-service role-based access control. So what that means is it can be extended to a simple use case of database admins managing their own set of database instances once they log in. It could also be extended all the way to backup as a service in very large organizations where you have multiple business units wanting to have their own backup infrastructure, or perhaps a part of the infrastructure dedicated to them. Right? There is full automation and orchestration, which means there is REST APIs which can be provided to developers, or which can be utilized for provisioning images, for getting continuous access to data, for CI/CD pipelines, for DevOps and dev test use cases. Right. All right. So what does actually instant data recovery and data reuse case means? I think I've been using this data reuse a lot of times. Right? So this is more of a breakdown of the traditional use cases where you see the Spectrum Protect Plus addressing the data loss scenarios. Right? So these four are the number one reasons why we in fact back up in the first place. Right? We back up because there is a chance of human error. We back up because there is a chance of hardware failure. We back up because there is a fear of corruption, accidental or purposeful deletion or corruption, or perhaps even a ransomware. Right? So if the reasons do not exist, we probably do not need an insurance policy. But on the other hand, if you look at these reasons, these are perhaps ticking time bomb kind of thing. You spend a lot of money, much like the insurance policy. At the same time, after paying, you also pray that, touch wood, I should never get into a situation that I hit any of these. Right? These are not good things to catch up on. So much like the insurance policy, you pay for the car insurance, but at the same time, you also pray that hopefully I never should be activating my insurance policy. And of course, there's no money back, which means I'm paying, but I'm not getting any money back unless I actually hit an incident. And this is this part which sort of opens up the door for continuous access to data, which means providing access to data for real continuous use cases, which means you no longer have your money and data locked here, because this is the age where we're saying data is the new oil, and you have a lot of data stored on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, yearly basis, stored for probably 10 to 15 years, or sometimes even forever, just for compliance purposes, right? So why just keep it locked? Why not open it up? Because there is a way to open up this data if the data was stored in native format. And this native format goes a long way, because most of the backup softwares, when they started the monolithic way, and that was the age of storage-led backup, which means you bought a tape library, backup softwares perhaps came with it, right? And all the backup softwares were designed to actually stream, multi-stream, multiplex, and you pack the data as efficiently as possible into tapes. And what that also meant was it was always stored in proprietary format, right? Which means if you do not have the backup software, there is no way you can see the data. It is only readable and accessible by your backup software. So it came to a point that customers would think, this actually my backup data is not my data, it is backup vendors' data. Because when it comes to migration, I'm sure a lot of people in these virtual rooms would know the pain of migration, because the data is in proprietary format, which is why it cannot be migrated. It cannot be utilized for other purposes unless it is streamed back or restored back into the other location, right? So there's no instant access possible. And that is where the things change when we build this product scratch up, right? Which means from scratch, we opened up these use cases. And I'll share the architecture on how simple that whole thing looks like, and a bit more explanation on what it means to store data in native format, and what are the possibilities which open up when you start storing data in just a normal storage native format, which could be accessed from anyone, anywhere, right? Through standard protocols. Right. So at the heart of our backup solution, or data resilience solution, to be more specific, we have the Spectrum Protect Plus server, right? So it runs, it is, as I mentioned, that the software shipment is exclusively through either a virtual appliance or through Kubernetes or Red Hat OpenShift container. Right? It can be run either on premises or in the cloud. So as long as you have our supported hypervisor, which means it's either VMware or Hyper-V or Red Hat OpenShift or vanilla Kubernetes distribution, you could run this on premises or even deploy in IBM Cloud, AWS, or Azure. Right? So it's available on the marketplace to be deployed. So that's the brain of the entire system, which holds the policies, catalog, the built-in indexing engine built on some of the open source microservices, Lucene, It's also running the very efficient MongoDB catalog. So you'll see a lot of elements which itself is ready to take care of the protection and resilience for the modern world. Not saying that I'm built on a monolithic architecture and I'll do a bolt-on recovery or protection for the modern world. Right? That's not the way we think the data resilience moving forward should work. So all it does is it does the API calls to all your infrastructure, which includes software as a service, things like Microsoft Office 365, your hypervisors, or your Kubernetes or Openshift infrastructure, or even supported physical database and application servers, right? So these, for example, include even physical databases running on Intel or Power platforms, which includes Oracle, DB2, SQL servers, MongoDB, and more in the pipeline to come, right? So it also covers Exchange and Office 365. In terms of storage, we on premises or in the cloud, we have the option of deploying a simple software-defined layer, what we call a copy repository. This stands for our ability to right? So our ability to have a scale up or a scale out storage for backup. Right? So this could be an Intel server, or it could be a virtual machine, which can be attached to any block storage. Right? This could be IBM flash system, or it could be any block storage coming from your existing storage vendor, or any new spinning drive, low cost storage to acquire. So on an individual server, we can scale up to, let's say, 400 terabyte with very minimal CPU and memory resources required. And beyond that, we can scale out. Again, this is just to keep in mind our data reuse use cases, which is why we have limited per server. But that usually doesn't stop us from scaling out to unlimited sort of repository sizes. Right? There are, of course, other options where we can offload the data to other storages, which means we can offload for compliance or for long-term retention to either public cloud or tapes, right? So you can be fully compliant to your requirements, your current practices of data protections of wherever you're moving data for either compliance or for cost-effective purposes if you want to utilize any of these technologies, right? So this, and a word here that we have also modernized tape, although not our core session, but if you ever attend IBM tape session, you'll see a lot of modernizations, not just on LTO-8. You'll also see what we have built for this workflow exclusively for now for this workflow is our S3 Glacier interface for tape, right? So what that means is not just the option or ability to move data to public cloud for, of course, the standard S3 storage, also giving you option to either utilize, let's say, cost-effective long-term archives on S3 Glacier storage on cloud, which is the Amazon S3 Glacier. Using the same protocol, we also provide you the ability to move data on tape, utilizing the same protocol. Right? So on our technology, we've built an S3 Glacier interface on LTO-8 libraries, right? So a very flexible way of data placement and data movement with very flexible choices, right? Whether short-term or long-term, right? So going back to the operational recovery area, which is what we're calling vSnap servers, right? These vSnap servers will offer deduplication, compression, and our hallmark technology, which has been proven for over a decade, is our true base ones, incremental forever backups, right? For all the workloads we are referring to here, right? So for all these workloads lined up here, we'll perform a true base ones, incremental forever backups, which will be stored in our copy repository, and the ability to either scale out into multiple vSnap servers or the ability to either build and offload storage on premises, built on object store or on tape. Right? We could replicate this vSnap server to your own secondary data center. We could also replicate the same data to public cloud. Right? We could replicate this to our certified cloud providers, which as of today is Azure, AWS, and IBM Cloud. Google Cloud is on the roadmap for the next quarter as well, right? So what that means is you'll have a bunch of options, right? Either offload data for compliance or for long-term retention in a very cost-effective way, or having an active disaster recovery site on public cloud, right? So if you do not have a secondary data center, you could perhaps replicate or spin up another vSnap server on the public cloud infrastructure, where you could continuously replicate our vSnap repository and have an instant access to data using our instant recovery feature for virtual machines, as well as your physical databases or Kubernetes or OpenShift environment. So I believe very flexible options in terms of how and where you could recover, meeting both we call something called recovery on demand, not a very new thing. So all the recovery on demand use cases, which helps you to have a secondary data center or a tertiary data center, or perhaps even a dev or UAT environment hosted on any of these cloud or your service provider, other service provider, right? So having said that, it can also run on any of your choice of local service provider where you could build these snap, right? And of course, this part shows the compliance and air gap, which I'll also touch upon, right? So air gap also comes from the origin. So there are two reasons why I would typically offload onto the left side. Number one is cost, right? So I would want to manage the cost of backups because I'm running spinning drives on premises. And for longer retentions, I still desire either tape ejectable copies to be moved offsite, or having a cloud infrastructure where I could offload to public cloud providers, right? And all these copies also come with an option of either doing a true physical air gap, and tape is a very strong technology to support physical air gap. So what that means is once we eject the tape from the tape libraries, you could actually store them in a safe, which is physically air gap. There is no wire connected. So there is no chance of cyber attacks. And I'm sure security admins would love it, because anything wired, no matter how secure we prove it to be, is still susceptible to a wired attack. So what that means is if this was connected to any of the online storage, although logically these storages are also certified for air gap, which means what we call warm, read write once, read many. But when it's wired, there are wired implications, and when something is physically air gap, which means there is no connection, it has its own benefits of being completely secure copy, which is physically guarded, right? So both options, cost and security, very flexible in terms of how you can deploy and utilize our core technology. Yeah, this is perhaps an explanation of what I just mentioned, that how you could do a cyber incident response with our snapshot backups. So our vSnap copy repository offers agentless snapshot-based backups, provides multiple SLA options, which can go all the way down to an RTO of 15 minutes. We can recover from an attack utilizing an iterative process. So what that means is we can spin up very dedicated, isolated IP networks so they do not interfere. So imagine if your current data is corrupted, there are chances that ransomware has also seeped into copies if they were not physically air gapped. It has also iterated into your copies kept on your backup servers. So we could utilize and recover in isolated environments for you to be able to have a clean data recovered from snapshot back to production in minutes, right? So that's the power of utilizing this workflow right from the snapshots all the way, not to mention having been integrated into the air gap copies capable in either on-premises object storage infrastructure, public cloud infrastructure, or right there for you on our IBM tapes, right? All right, so opening up and shifting the gears a little bit. We are probably already close to 30 minutes in the presentation, so I'll move towards the closure, right? So shifting gears on OpenShift, we have done a lot of effort in making sure that all your next generation workloads and your application modernization initiatives could be supported and protected in the same way, in fact, in a lot better way, because once you're modernizing applications, it is a chance to also modernize your data resilience infrastructure, right? And that's where we are really at the forefront, sitting here to assist you with all your Kubernetes or Red Hat OpenShift infrastructure, to be able to protect them, not just their cluster configurations, also the persistent volumes. They're all newer mission critical databases moving to the or moving into the newer infrastructure. Right? So For those who are familiar with the OpenShift, our capabilities are tied to the Velero, which means we have utilized the backup as a service namespace on container resilience. And I don't mean to be a lot detailed, I don't need to present a very detailed technical architecture here. But what you will see here is our ability to utilize our vSnap technologies to index the native snapshots using our container storage interface. Right, so we have native integration with OpenShift container storage. You will see a very aggressive and perhaps first in the market integration with all our Red Hat development. Right, so we are keeping a close track with the SPP Velero, which is the open source Kubernetes release, and the OADP, which is the OpenShift distribution of Velero. So we are so much like the VMware. I think for those who are very familiar with VMware infrastructure, how BADP worked in the VMware world, OpenShift has the OADP, which is a redistribution or Red Hat distribution of Velero namespace. And we are utilizing both for the vanilla Kubernetes distributions as well as OpenShift. Right? So we have accelerated our efforts in making sure all your data and all your applications moving into containers are protected in a much better way than they were in the pre-container world. So, and of course, all the ability to move data for long-term retention, for cost-effective use cases, and for security use cases, the cyber resilience use cases come along with this, which means we can create snapshots, multiple snapshots, index them for quick recoveries. We can move the data on an iterative basis into multiple storage choices on premises or in the cloud, or perhaps just do a simple replications with dedupe and compress repository into remote any number of other locations. Right. All right. So moving towards the end, we have an interactive demo provided. So I think we'll share the slides at the end of this presentation. I think if we had time, I wanted to also show some of the dashboards. But if you click on this link, what you will see is, I think a sample of those screens is provided here. There is no sign up required to access this demo. What you will see as soon as you click on this link is you will see a guided demo on the right pane with username and password provided of a live infrastructure running in read-only mode for you to play around. Right? So you could see the screens, you could see the capabilities right in the dashboard. And even if you do a simple search of Spectrum Protect Plus demo, that is the first page. Perhaps beyond YouTube, you will see the SPP Spectrum Protect Plus sandbox environment for you to be able to access and play around. Right? And of course, we're more than happy through VST ECS to run through a live demo or even a short on-premises POC if required. Right? So feel free to try out. I think this is where the action begins. So we've said enough, but seeing this in action is what makes people believe. Right? There is a free trial, as I mentioned. There is a 30-day trial extendable to 90 days for you to just click on the link. This requires a bit of sign up, very quick information, your email, name, and company name. That's all. You should be able to download and get it up and running. And since the delivery is strictly through virtual appliance and containers, so depending on what environment you're running in your infrastructure, you could actually get this up and running within an hour, which means your first backup up and running within an hour. Of course, excludes the download time. Depending on your wire speed, it could take from a few minutes to an hour. But once you get this downloaded, I think it's pretty easy to get it up and running. And of course, we're all there to assist you to let you try this. So I'll summarize here. We are just the advantages, right? So it is a virtual or container appliance and an agentless architecture, which means once you get this up and running, configure IP address, bare minimum things like the domain and the gateway, and of course, a bit of host name requirements, as well as pointing it to a simple block storage. In fact, it doesn't have to be block storage for virtual machine infrastructure. It can be your NAS data store or your virtual SAN data store as well. So any block, because once it becomes a data store, we can access it using DMFS as a block store. So we can build a scale out or scale up deduplication and backup storage repository on top. Right? And it has a broad workload support, which means it unifies data backup, recovery, replication for physical file systems, virtual machines, Office 365, and all your other mission critical workloads. It has an end-to-end policy, which means you could automate data lifecycle management, including data recovery, replication, retention, and not to mention the multiple storage option you get right from starting from your on-premises storage options all the way to tape and public cloud infrastructure. We provide a global search. Again, this is a very cool indexing feature which comes with the product. It's a combination of our microservices running in a service mesh architecture with Lucene and a combination of Lucene and MongoDB, which allows you to do a Google-like search for all the content you've backed up. So you could do a recovery or granular recovery of all the items just by doing a Google-like search on the interface and having access to multiple point-in-time snapshots listed right in your Web 2.0 interface. It has built-in space-efficient snapshots as well as compression and deduplication. So this is sort of kind of a mature technology which you will see for data savings. In fact, for us, data reduction already starts at our very mature base once incremental forever policies. So since we do not generate a lot of duplicate data, sometimes our customers do not even turn off the deduplication because they see that as an overhead. So deduplication is only benefit when you generate a lot of duplicate data, and the whole sort of technology for deduplication in the last probably 15 years marketed by a lot of vendors is developed on an assumption that customers are generating duplicate data. So our technology believes in not generating duplicate data in the first place by believing in a true base once incremental forever backup. Thus, deduplication becomes optional for our data reduction strategy. We can still turn it on and provide fantastic savings, but yeah, this is how the whole approach differs from how perhaps the technology has been in the last 15 years. And not to say it's not as new. We are already in our 8th release of this product with perhaps not really public reference, but we have 3 or 4 large enterprise FSI as well as government agencies in the Philippines already utilizing this technology for their modern as well as the contemporary workloads, right? So we have a flexible data retention as well as intelligent data security, which means we can provide abilities like ransomware detection, ability to lock down the data on object storage, integration with those object storages to enforce policy for again, data security purposes. And since it is software defined, it avoids lock-in into vendor-specific data protection appliances, and not just appliances, even the whole technology, because the data is stored in native format. Even if you pull the plug on the entire software infrastructure, we are still leveraging on the open source underneath. The file systems are still utilizing the native Linux open source file systems, which means you could still access that data, and that data will forever remain your data in native format. So this is one of our reference, public reference. So since the Philippines customer reference, we do not have a public reference yet, but this is probably the closest we have since 2017. In fact, this is PT Wing Surya, fast consumer moving goods organization. If you've ever tried some of the fantastic noodles, I love me sit up from Wings. Right? They also have a bunch of other FMCG consumers. Of course, this is one of the largest. And in Indonesia, they're headquartered in Surabaya. Right? So all their manufacturing plant is right there in Surabaya. And this is where we deployed the product for their FMCG mission critical database as well as their containerized workloads. So there's a link for a quick video. You could even do a Google search on Spectrum Protect Plus Wing Surya, right? And you'll see a 3-minute video of thing done from Wing Surya to see the product in action. Right? All right, so I think that's pretty much it. We'll leave a little bit of time to pick any Q&As if you might have on the chat windows. All right, so let's stop sharing here and perhaps.